Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this morning's webinar on the new repair layers in Capture One Pro 8. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. If this is your first webinar, just some housekeeping so you know who you're listening to. My name's David. I'm part of the software marketing team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. The webinars normally run for 45 to 60 minutes. Today we'll probably be relatively quick because using the repair/heal layers is very, very straightforward. So we probably don't need to spend an hour talking about it. So that just means we can wrap up a little bit faster. You are very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout on today's subject. If you're on your Mac or PC, at the bottom of the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a section called questions. Put a question in there and that will come straight through to me. If you're on your iOS device, you'll see a question mark icon at the top. Or equally on your Android device, and tap there, and again that will come straight through to me. So don't be shy, feel free to ask questions. If we do have some more time at the end, then we can just open up the discussion a bit wider to any aspect on Capture One as well. So today we're going to be talking about the new functionality of repairing or cloning and healing parts of an image. So let's just move over to Capture One itself. So you should be seeing the main screen now. I just open up the questions panel so we can see this. What I will also start is a little mouse locator just to help you see where the mouse is. So if you see that, that's where the mouse is. So Capture One 8, we had some new additions to local adjustments. If you haven't used a local adjustment before, basically a local adjustment, if we just pick an image at random, for example, a local adjustment basically means, and I'll go through this in finite detail, but a local adjustment basically means that you can target one area of an image. Let's just sort of draw there, and then you could locally adjust that section, for example, and just basically showing you there that a local area you could adjust exposure for. So the local adjustments also now allow you to repair and clone parts of an image as well. So that can be really, really useful for removing unwanted areas of an image, cloning bits and pieces here and there, and so on. It's very simple and straightforward to use. Just to give you a couple of examples, if we take this one here, sorry, that would be this one. You can see up here in the top left-hand corner the various different layers. So something simple like removing this little buoy down the corner here, or buoy, however you describe it, and then just changing a little bit of the parameters of the sea, getting rid of a wave down here. So something basic like that. Or if we take this example here, let's bring up this one. I'll just zoom in a little bit. You can see here we've got a hole in the leaf and we've got a scratch here. And then it's very simple, if I pick the right one, to take away something like the hole in the leaf. If I just turn that layer back on and then remove that scratch from the backboard as such. So simple things like that, ideal for the functionality in Capture One 8, basic repair and heal. I think if you sort of set your expectations about what it sort of can and can't do as such, then that helps you to understand the tool better as well. So if we look at the daisy here, for example, it's really easy to just get rid of that petal if you wanted to. But for example, if you wanted to take this petal, cut it out, rotate it and stick it on up here, for example, or if on a portrait set with multiple people, you wanted to remove heads and swap them around and stuff like that, that's not what the tool is designed for. So maybe don't think of it as a retouching tool, think of it as simply as it's known as a repair tool. So it's not for retouching, it's for repair. So based on that, you can decide what makes sense to do in Capture One and what makes sense to do in Photoshop. But we'll go through and show you some examples of exactly how to use it. Let's start with just a really, really super simple one, which is this image here. And if I go to the unrepaired version, like so, you can just see there's like a watermark or something in the bottom left-hand corner. So if I just flick between the two, then you can see that's a really simple thing that we can repair. So how do we do that? Let's just zoom in a little bit. That is just an addition of the grain tool on this image, not super noisy or anything like that. And I think that's a good thing to note about using the repair layers, is that obviously if you've got multiple adjustments on an image, Capture One takes care of using those multiple adjustments in its process of cloning and healing and so on. So after you've done a clone and heal, if you then suddenly decide to change the exposure of the image, then of course that's also going to happen on the repair heal layers as well. So very simple, how do we use it? So local adjustments, if you haven't used local adjustments before, so if you remember the very quick demo, you can use a local adjustment to adjust things like exposure, high dynamic range, sharpening, clarity, and so on. I'll do a whole webinar in, I think, 2 weeks' time purely on using local adjustments. It's definitely one of the strengths of Capture One, and I'd recommend sitting in on that because you can do so much with local adjustments, and it's really good fun to use. So if we just want to repair something simple like that, you'll see down here you've got a plus button in the local adjustments tool. Click and hold on that and you can see new layer. So that's just a basic adjustment layer, new clone layer, and new heal layer, like so. So if we take let's just do a new heal layer, like so. It'll say repair layer 1 and ask us to give it to a name. I just call this spot, I guess, for want of any other word. So now that's set to heal. You can actually change this later on, and I'll show you how to do that at the end. So we need to pick our brush. So this is our local adjustments brush, and then to change, excuse me, to change the brush parameters, right-click. And then you'll see all your various different brush settings here. Size, of course, hardness, that's how much feathering there is on the brush, and then the opacity of the brush. Opacity doesn't really apply so much here. I'll return to that a bit later on, but generally you want that set to 100%. So once you're happy with your brush parameters, I want to be able to cover that spot. First, you need to select the source of your repair. So obviously I want to take something from around here and repair this spot here. Like Photoshop, if you hold down your Alt key or Option key as you might know it, you'll see the cursor change as I press Alt on and off. So basically if I click and hold the Alt key down, this means that I'm selecting my source point. If you don't select the source point, Capture One will pick it out for you, but it makes much more sense for you to select it yourself. So Alt click once, and now that's my source point set, indicated by that circle. If you want to move it, you can just drag it around like so, and then all you need to do is brush like so, and then it shows you that I've gone from here to here to make the repair. So you'll always see your source point and your final repair point. You can always move those around, so if you feel that you can pick a better source point, you can, and then if you want to move the repair point around, you can see that happening like so. You can just drop that exactly where you want to have it. So you can always move those 2 points later on. And there you see my spots taken away. Paul is asking, can you have multiple heals on one layer with different heal sources? No, the idea is that each layer has its own repair source. So you'll see in the next example that you can have one source point, and then you can actually do multiple heals, but you just have to be aware of how it's working, and then we'll look at that on the next example. But you can see in that very simple example, if I have my brush selected, you can see exactly we're taking from here and going to there and then making the repair. The difference between heal and clone is very simple. Clone will just do a complete copy of the source point to the repair point, making no changes. Heal will try to match the luminosity better of the source point. So Martin's asking, is the adjustment layer function added for the ease of having to go to Photoshop, or do you think it surpasses the equivalent functions? Well, I think, as I said at the beginning, for some tasks, like simple things like that, it makes sense to do it in Capture One because you've got all the raw data to work with. Now, if all of a sudden I decide I didn't want this image to be black and white, if I just say turn black and white off, for example, then I don't have to worry about changing anything on my heal or repair layer because Capture One is just taking care of that. So it's really good in that respect that once you've got heal and repair layers done, you can change all the adjustments in the image. For example, let's see, I can go back to black and white, and then of course that heal and repair point is matched. And we'll look at a few more examples of that as we go through the other images. Casimiras is asking about red eye corrections. Well, red eye correction is a better job for the color editor, to be honest, and it's really simple how to do that. If there's time, we'll have a look, but that's probably a better subject for local adjustments. Sebastian's asking, is there a performance impact when using repair layers? Yes, it can be. If you're on an older machine which isn't so powerful, you can experience a performance impact. So what you could do is always leave your repair layers as like your last step. I mean, I'm running on a relatively new laptop, MacBook Pro, and I don't really get any performance hit as such. But if you've got lots of different layers and you're still making adjustments, maybe it makes sense to do the layers at the end. So let's have a look at an example where we've got kind of multiple areas that we want to repair as such. So for example, if I just turn off this layer, that's just an adjustment layer, this one here, sorry. If I just turn off this layer, you can see we're getting rid of some leaves over here in the top left-hand corner. Now I've only actually got one source point for this one. You can see if with the brush selected, I've got one source point, and then it's just making sure that it covers all of those. So again, how do we do that? And then I'll explain how the source point is relative to its fixed point. So we've got a few leaves here. Let's say we just want to get rid of some of those. So first of all, let's make our new heal layer like so, and I'll just call this leaves. You don't have to name it, but it just helps if you do. First we need to set our source point, so let's just pick something around here. Alt key, remember, to set your source point like so, and then we can just chuck a mask there. We could go here like so, we could go there, we could go there, for example. So I don't necessarily have to make new source points for all those different layers. What it's doing in this case is that the repair point is always relative to the source point. So if I just turn the mask on for a second, so you see this leaf is being repaired by this point here. This leaf is being repaired by an equal relative point over here. This one is being repaired by a relative point here, and so on and so forth. So it's always A to B is the same for each repair point, but it does work. You see in this case is that you can use one source point and do multiple heals like so. If you want to get rid of any of these, of course, if you just change to your erase brush, which is E on the keyboard, or you can choose it over here, then for example, if we just do a right click, and then we could get rid of the ones that we didn't want to have, for example, like so. So it's pretty simple in that respect to have multiple heals from one different source point. If we take again another real simple example like this, for example, you can see there's a little flag at the bottom. This image has a bunch of other adjustments on it. So if I just turn off the mask, you see we've got exposure adjustment there. We've got, I'm not sure what layer 2 is doing, not very much. Layer 3, it's just brightening up the corner like so. But your repair layer, of course, is going to take all of that into account. So if I want to get rid of the little blurry out of focus flag there completely, I just again need to say new heal layer like so, and take my brush. Let's just call that flag. I can press B on the keyboard to get the brush, Alt to select the source point, and then brush away like so, and then the flag has gone. If you want to see where you're masking, have only display mask when drawing selected here. That means as you brush, you can see how the mask is developing. Obviously it doesn't need to be that big. So if I press E for the erase brush, then I can go in and I can just clean up my selection like so, and B for brush, just to improve on that again. And remember, if you're on the dot, if you think you can do a better job of finding the source and repair point, you can just move those around. Marco, is suggesting, I suppose the heal layer does a better job than spot removal, as there are perhaps more nuances possible. Yes, definitely. Definitely. I mean, you can see in this example, we can actually use, if you look at the face, like so, you can see there's various muck on the face. That's actually removed quite nicely just by using the the spot tool. So you don't always have to use heal and clone. Like in this case, if we just go to this tool here, spot removal, let's just bring it out so you can see it. You can pick your spot, and then you can go on the image, and then if you again do a right click, you can change the size of the spot removal, and then we could just click like so, and then we can get rid of the various dots and spots like that. And you can see that's relatively quick. But yes, there's definitely a lot more nuances can be had using the repair layers as opposed to the spot tool, but that does a pretty nice job of getting rid of little nasty things like that. If we look at our other landscape here, for example, let's just put that back away. Okay, right in the background, you can see just a mast here like so. And again, dead simple to remove. And this shows, like, if you want to move the source and repair points around, this is a good case for that, because we obviously want to match the horizon and get that in the right spot. So if I do click and hold new heal layer, and we call that mast or whatever it is, take our brush like so, and that's probably a little bit big, so let's just make that brush smaller. Right click, remember, to get up those settings. Option click to select your source point like so. I want to go roughly on the horizon, and then I can pick where I want to brush like so to get rid of that. Now you see, if I haven't got that quite right, you can see that doesn't look like how the sea should behave. But of course, if I just pick this up, you see that's what a clone would look like. But then I can just move that down and then match up the horizon quite nicely. When I let go, it will then recalculate to match the luminosity. You'll see the difference between heal and clone here. If I could probably move that down a bit more. If we change this back to do a right click and change this to clone, you see clone doesn't work because the luminosity over here has varied. So it looks really obvious, which is why heal does a much better job on most things, for example. Yanni is asking, any plans to increase the number of layers? Yes, in a way, if possible. The problem is, of course, is you can imagine that as we're adding layers, we have more and more calculations. So on a simple image like this, for example, as you rotate, of course, if I just do a basic rotate, then all the layers have to rotate with that, and their relative source points and adjustments rotated as well. So there's loads of maths involved in this sort of stuff. You can see it happens pretty quickly, but you imagine if you had 50 layers with 50 different elements that needed rotating and all those mathematical calculations done again, it does get really intensive. So it's kind of balancing with the number of layers that would be nice to have with the number of layers that's actually possible as such, because it can get too intensive as such. Again, another good case for being able to sort of move the points around. So our little hole in our leaf here. Now, I think this is a perfect example of something that makes sense to do in Capture One. Yes, of course, you could do it in Photoshop, but you don't need all the necessary tools to do that in Photoshop, and it's easy to do that on the raw data in Capture One. So you're probably used to how this works now, but plus to make a new heal layer, call this leaf hole like so. Take our brush, and then I'm going to guesstimate that we might have a good kind of texture down here somewhere. So option click, that's my source point, and now I can brush in, and then you see that doesn't look quite right. So what I can do is just move that down a bit to get kind of a good match of that vein to that vein. And now as I've got too much in there, if I go to my erase brush, right click to make that a bit smaller, and then just take away the mask there as such, just at the bottom, because I only really want to kill the leaf hole, nothing else. Then you see that does a much better job, almost looks exactly how it should be. Zooming out, of course, you'd never know that that hole was there in the first place. I think this mark on the board here, I think worked better with clone. Again, if we just do a new heal layer, call that scratch, for example, take our brush, and then pick our source point, which could be just somewhere over here, and then doesn't need to be that big at all. Right click to get your brush settings, and then we can just go brush like so, and it's gone. So simple stuff like that is really easy to do. Andre's asking how many layers are available. 10. So that works quite nicely. Marco's saying, I used to try to remove a scratch by putting several dots next to each other in spot removal tool. Definitely not an easy job, yeah, because they'd certainly improve. Well, I think if you wanted to remove a scratch, it would be easier to just use the repair layer like so. I mean, this is quite a kind of a messy sort of background, this one. So if you wanted to clean that up again, we could do that, call that scratch 2. I think on an image that was really kind of bad, then Photoshop makes sense to kind of get rid of that sort of stuff. But if it's not too bad, then it's easy to see. We could get rid of that one as well. We could even probably do change that to, oh, that is on a heel. So that kind of simple stuff we could do nicely in Capture One without having to go into Photoshop as such. So we've got rid of that scratch up the top, that scratch on the side, and got rid of the hole in our leaf as well, like so. So that's just a real simple retouch that makes sense, I think, to do that in Capture One. Burns asking to repeat the erase tool application. Yeah, sure. I mean, erase is basically just if you make a mistake. So like I did here with the leaf hole, let's just bring up the brush. So if I made the mask a little too big, so let's do a right click, make the brush bigger, and let's just exaggerate. For example, let's say I just had too big a mask. Doesn't need to be that big. See, that looks terrible. That looks completely obvious. So if I press E to get the erase mask off, then all I'm doing is just taking away. You see where the red is? That's the scope of how much I'm going to copy from the source point to the repair point. So I only really need to cover the hole. So that will probably do a better job like so. And then brush, right click, and then just to fill in that last little bit like so. So really the erase is just to fix errors. I did experiment with trying to do this, where if I take the erase mask and then I reduce the opacity, I was trying to think if there was a way you could mimic the fade option in Photoshop. So if you haven't brushed in 100%, you've only brushed in like 50% by changing the opacity here, then maybe you could get kind of a half repair, like if you wanted to get rid of some wrinkles under somebody's eye but make it look a little bit less obvious, then maybe you could do that with a lower opacity as such. So that's something I've been experimenting with at the moment. Klaus is saying, any recommendation of brush size compared for things to fix? Yeah, I think just keep it small, really. Like if we go to our mystery object in the sea, which I think is this one here, a buoy or a buoy, as you may say it. So if we take our heel layer, call this buoy like so. Let's take our click and hold to take our brush, or you can press B on the keyboard if you wish. So you can see we've got our plus. Option click to set the source, and then I think just to remove that, I just literally keep it relatively small like that. Don't think there's any need to go sort of bigger than that. Maybe just a little bit down there. So try to keep it as small as possible, and then it's less obvious. Jean-Christophe is saying, can you save a layer to apply it to multiple images with the same default? Yes. So like, I guess if you had a nasty spot on a, whoops, excuse me, Command Z, Command Z to undo. If you had a nasty spot that the spot tool couldn't remove, like this one will probably get removed nice and easily with the spot removal tool. Click once, and yep, that goes away nicely. But if it was like a more complicated thing that you wanted to remove, then you could just simply select more than one image, and then if you went to your layers tool, you see this option here. This is copy and apply. So if I click on that, it will basically copy all the local adjustments from one image to another. So that would work in a situation where the spot or the thing to remove or repair was always in the same place. But if it wasn't, then you'd have to individually move the source points around on the next images. But I guess if you were shooting product and you were shooting like a wine label or something which had a defect, then you could easily just copy that across from one to another. Could you give some examples of cloning? Yep, sure. I think mostly I've found that I'm healing most of the time because I've really been using this for repair as opposed to cloning stuff. I think like on the leaf option here, the scratch kind of looked better. See, that's a clone. That's set to a clone. So I think the scratch was taken away quite nicely with a clone. You could use clone to copy one element of an image to another. For example, let's just say new clone layer, call this leaf. Maybe this would work in a situation with clouds or something like that. But if you wanted to copy one element of an image to elsewhere, so let's say we set our source point as this leaf, we could copy another leaf elsewhere if we wanted to. I personally don't have much of a use for that, but maybe there's a situation where you could. Obviously, I'd do a better job of it. You wouldn't need such a big mask. You would just need a relatively small mask, like so. So you could copy elements of an image to another, but I'm not sure that's something I would do. If you can think of a good use for that, let me know. Brush hardness, Janet is asking, what do I find works well? I think you can see here what I've been using is that it's relatively soft hardness. I think if it's too hard, like in, let's look at our almonds, for example. See, this is quite good. This gives you a good indication of how nicely that texture is matched. Because even on this almond, we've got no idea what's behind there. That the algorithm does a good job of blending that in. So let's just try this with really hard, let's say new heal layer. And we call this almond. Let's try with a full hardness. Whoops, wrong one. Like so. And option click. And then mask away. Actually, you can't really tell, to be honest, on this because it's kind of a soft background. You can't really tell where the edges as such. So maybe it doesn't matter too much when you're healing. Cloning, I think you'd probably more likely to see a hard edge as such. What about if we just get rid of that as well? No, still looks pretty good. I think probably to be on the safe side, it makes sense to have a slight feathering like that, because if you are trying to mask it the best, because we can get rid of all of that from one source point, then maybe having a slight bit of softness is just the way forward as such. So yeah, I think not too critical, but maybe by default it makes sense to just have a little tiny bit of feathering to help it. Alexandra is working. How do the repair layers work with adjustment layers? Who has higher priority? Well, in terms of the calculations, I don't actually know what has priority, but you'll see, with any image that has repair layers as such, like this one here, we've got rid of that C part. Just to show you, we got rid of that buoy and we got rid of that kind of mark in the sea. If I'm on my background layer, then I suddenly decide, well, actually, I think I'd like to up the exposure a bit. You see, it's seamless. It's not like that we have to recalculate anything and you can see nasty stuff happening where the layers are. You see, as I adjust exposure, it's like it was never there as such. So you don't really have to sort of concern yourself with that kind of stuff. Basically, it'll just work. I think the question earlier about performance, if you have lots of different repair layers, maybe it makes sense to leave those to the end. And again, it does depend very much on your, machine as such. And this is an 80 megapixel file, I think, or a 60 megapixel file. Let's see. It's a, IQ 250. Okay, so 50 megapixel file. So still fairly heavy as such, but you can see with a couple of repair layers, I can happily, rotate the image pretty fluidly and everything without any issue. And it doesn't take forever to rebuild or anything like that. So based on your own system, I'd sort of run your own test. Remco's asking, can you copy just one layer instead of all layers? No, you can only select. It's either all or nothing. When you do a copy paste with the layers, if I copy that, you see it just copies the local adjustments. There's probably very few cases where copying a local adjustment makes sense, because the mask is often very individual to each image. I think the only situation where it does make sense is if you are shooting multiple things of the same object, like a few different product shots. Maybe you're doing multiple exposures for lighting. Then it makes sense that you could copy and apply your repair from one image to another. But going from various different image to image, there's few cases where that applies. I don't think I've ever done a copy and apply of a local adjustment, so I can only think it would be good in a studio situation. For focus stacking, yeah, that's a good point. Yep. So Remco is focus stacking. So yes, if you wanted to repair the same spot on each stack for focus, then that would make sense. So the only thing you could do, Remco, is that after you've done a copy apply, you could just delete the layer that didn't make sense to you. But depending how you're doing your focus stacking, if you're moving the camera, I think it would be all right because the spot would stay the same size relative. If you're adjusting focus on the lens, you might just have to watch yourself a little bit, to be honest. Okay, I think you get the idea of how it works as such. I mean, just to give you one final example, this is sort of one I used earlier on. Again, this is not retouching, it's just changing the elements of the image. So this one, we can do a simple thing if we wanted to get rid of this guy. There's already a gradient mask on the sky. If I just turn that on and off, again, the local adjustment property on that layer is recognized by the heel layer, so it doesn't matter in that respect about doing it. Well, there's no need to do things in a certain order, as I hope you've seen. You can do your adjustments first, you can do your repairs first, you can do them in the middle or whatever. It simply doesn't matter. So let's make that brush a bit smaller. Choose our source point. So let's say on the side of the hill here, and then we could just brush away and get rid of our climber like so. Now that doesn't join up super well, so if I wanted to, I could just shift that up a little bit. Again, you can see as we're moving it. Now, clone wouldn't make sense in this respect. If I change that to clone, you can see the luminosity is wrong from the source point to the repair point. So by having that to heel, then you see it blends in really, really nicely, and you'd never know the guy was there, for example. So that's another good use of something like in the repair layers. If we just want our lone man here as such, you could probably also get rid of him as well if you wanted to. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the repair layers work. Just to recap, and we do the fast recap of exactly how the tool works. Let's just delete that one there. So you've got your image here. As I said, do the repair layers at the end if you're worried about performance on an older machine. Decide on the element that you want to get rid of. Click and hold to make a new clone or heel layer. Remember that heel layer will take account of the luminosity and do a better job of repairing what's there. Once you've chosen that, give it a name, like so. Choose your brush here, so draw mask, for example. Alt-click to set the source point. Click once, and you'll see a dot, and then mask away to get rid of the object. If you wish to, once you've done that, you can choose a different source point and you can shift the repair point. If you want to add to the mask, you can just brush again. You can just keep adding to it as such. If the mask is too big, then you can choose erase mask over here, or simply press E on the keyboard, and then you can take away parts of the mask that you didn't want to have, for example. So that's all there is to it. It's really, really simple to use. Remember, you've got a maximum of 10 layers That's a combination of adjustment layers and repair layers. They don't have to be in any kind of order. As we spoke about before, just be aware that you might have more performance hit on older machines as such. Michael's asking, is it possible to use the same repair layer on several pictures? Yes, it is. For example, if we did have, well, we have this situation actually, if we had a bunch of different variants, let's say on this image here, we've changed our scene, we've got rid of our boy. Let's say we fancy to have this image in black and white as well. So I could say clone variant. So if we clone it, let's just move it up one by saying promote. So this was my original image and this is the cloned one. So let's say we could then have this in black and white, for example. Now, if we hadn't cloned that, we just had these two various options. Let's just get rid of my adjustment layers. So you see I've got my original here with the repairing done and my black and white version without the repairing done. So if I wanted to copy that across, all you need to do is select both of them like so. You see up in here in local adjustments, we've got the up down arrow. So if I click on that and then it says adjustments clipboard, we've got local adjustments checked, then all I need to do is press apply like so, and you see that's now applied it over to the image. The fact that it's black and white doesn't make any difference because it won't use the source point from the original image, it will use the source point from the copied to image as such. So again, let's say on this image here, let's just reset that. Let's say on this particular one, I wanted to have a different look, like lower saturation. Let's have some, a bit more higher clarity, for example, and let's drop the contrast down. Again, we could do the same thing. We could go to local adjustments. We could copy those two guys and then click on the little copy apply icon up here and then say apply, and hey presto, you see it's gone away. So it's easy to do that. So I think expanding on what I said before, if you've got static objects like you're shooting product and you want to repair a label, perhaps you're doing multiple shots for different exposures, for different lighting, then it makes sense to copy a repair layer from one to the other. If you've got lots of different variants like this to look at kind of different looks of the image, then again, that's a good case for copying and applying repair layers over, for example. Soren is asking, when should I prefer clone rather than heal? The question did come up earlier. Clone is just literally a straight copy for copy. So I haven't found so many uses for it yet. If you wanted to copy an element from an image to somewhere else to duplicate it, you could use it for that. But if you're trying to repair something, generally heal works much, much better. So I think your go-to choice is going to be heal, and then clone I think may be useful for just duplicating one area of an image to another. Or if you're doing a really simple retouch, like if you've got a perfectly white wall and you just want to remove some spots for it, then clone would work. But so would heal. So to be honest, you're probably going to use heal most of the time. Does auto mask work for cloning and healing? It would do, but I don't think there's much point because you don't have to be so specific with the mask. Like for this example here, you don't have to perfectly get the mask exactly around the area that you want to heal. I think it just makes sense to be a little rough with the mask. It doesn't matter too much. And again, for this situation, that was a really rough mask as well, because the algorithm is taking care of that on heal. If you were cloning, maybe you'd have to use the auto mask, but the auto mask would work in exactly the same way. So where you're brushing, the auto mask would work as it would on a local adjustment layer. I saw a question, multiple white balance for mixed lighting. Yes, it is possible. That doesn't refer to today's webinar, but I think as we've pretty much covered heal and repair layers, if you do want to ask something else, then go right ahead. Local adjustments for white balance, for example. Hey presto, here's a good example. So you can see here in this situation, we've got, see, a local adjustment for white balance, because if we look here, if we turn that off, you can see we've got daylight streaming in from the window and we've got artificial light source here. So all there is a simple gradient mask. If I press M on the keyboard to show the mask, simple gradient mask there. which once our local white balance is turned on, we can just balance for that area. So that gives you a fantastic all over perfect white balance with two different light sources. Works really well. Remco is asking, do you see it possible having auto mask for X-Trans image? Yes, any Fuji users, you may have noticed that auto mask doesn't work on the X-Tran. That's because our auto mask calculation is based on the Bayer pattern of the sensor, which the X-Trans sensor doesn't have. So it would require a completely different algorithm for the Fuji sensor. So we just have to decide how difficult that is to do and if it's even sort of possible as such within the realms of Capture One. But it's not being ignored. We are looking into different ways of doing it. Oh, Simon has a tip for me. That's good. Might be worth mentioning holding shift at the same time as clicking copy repair to adjustments across all selected image. Yes, so that's just a shortcut. So if you are copying your multiple across. So for example, I showed you in here, you could press copy, apply, and then press apply. If you want to avoid seeing this dialog and reduce the operation to one click, before you click here, if you hold your shift key down and click, it will simply apply it to all images. So if I select these 4 images, for example, hold my shift key down and click, then it's done. Then it applies that copy apply that particular tool to all those images. Simon says he uses it for sharpness for image, which is a really good tip. So if at the end of a session you decided that you haven't adjusted the sharpness for the images, simple thing to do, you could go to sharpening here, set the sharpening for what you want for this image, select all, that's Command A, hold your shift key down and click on the little copy apply button here, hold shift, click once, and that would apply that sharpening value to all the other images. It's a really good time-saving shortcut. Thanks, Simon. Willem is asking, is it possible to draw straight lines with the local adjustment brush, as in hold the shift key in Photoshop? No, it's not, but I agree that would be really useful. So I keep mentioning that to R&D. So I think that would be a good addition. If you don't know what Willem is talking about, if you wanted to draw a straight line with a brush, then the way to do it in Photoshop is you start at one end. So if I had my master on here, if I held my shift key and click once, then it would draw a straight line between the two options. But that would be a good feature in Capture One. So I shall mention it again, Willem. Thank you. Tom is asking, in the local adjustments using a brush in Capture One 7, you used to be able to hold shift while still on the brush tool to temporarily use the eraser. It's not shift, it's the, oh, that's a good point. I think that's something we need to check, because it used to be the Alt key you could flick, but now we used Alt key for setting the source point, so that's why it's not working. You can press E and that will take you to erase, and B will take you to brush, or if you're on a Wacom tablet, then it should take you to erase as well. That's something I need to check on my Wacom, but I tend to use B for brush and E for erase. So E takes me to erase, press B, and then you're back to brush like so. But that's a good shortcut that we should have in there somewhere. Is there a shortcut for hiding the source and cloned areas apart from moving the cursor out of the image area? If you, let's just find this guy. If you have the brush, and if we hide and show the mask, that's a good point. I think you can only, no, I think it's there by default, but I think, as you're right, it might be useful to be able to hide those points. If you press V, then that takes you to the normal select. That's what I tend to do. So if you press V, that just takes you to the arrow tool. If you want to press B, that takes you to the brush, V to the pointer, B to the brush. So that's the way I'm doing it as such. So rather than having to move the cursor out of the area, just press V like so. But maybe that's a good shortcut that we should have as well. Okay. Yes, Klaus is saying M turns the mask on and off, and also removes the points as well. So yeah. Incidentally, for any operations like this and local adjustments, I think it does help enormously to use a graphics tablet of some sort. I'm using a Wacom, but doesn't have to be Wacom, of course. It makes it much easier for drawing masks. You can be a lot more fluid and a lot more accurate. So in a couple of weeks, there is a webinar on local adjustments, and we'll cover a little bit in more detail about using a Wacom tablet as well, because that will really enhance your experience of drawing and masking and erasing and making nice masks and so on. I find it incredibly difficult to do with a mouse personally. We'll also look a little bit into how to set up the Wacom, because there's various things that you can do for Capture One that make it a little bit easier as well. Okay, well, hopefully that gives you a gist of how to use the repair layers, cloning and healing. It is pretty straightforward. Before we depart each other, I just mention that next week we have another webinar, of course, same time, same place, all about managing the catalog. So Capture One 8 as well as Capture One 7 has catalog/library functionality. So if you're a little bit unsure on how to do that or how to maximize all the different features, then I would suggest tuning in next week. So we'll look at getting images into a catalog, organizing the images in the catalog, whether you want to do that on the file system itself or whether you want to use virtual organization. So that's using projects, albums, smart albums, things like that. I'll briefly show you how you can import your Aperture or Lightroom library or catalog as well. So we have a brief look at that. So if you are an Aperture or Lightroom user, you can basically bring your catalog into Capture One without too much work, and a lot of the settings and adjustments as well, most importantly metadata. So we look at all those various different things and the new features of version 8 compared to version 7, like exporting catalogs, merging catalogs, synchronizing folders, all that kind of fun stuff that makes using catalogs simple. So what I'll do is I'll hang on for a little bit in case any other questions pop in. As I said, slightly shorter webinar today, but the subject is pretty straightforward but important nevertheless. The webinar has been recorded, so look out for an email in 1 or 2 days' time, and there'll be a link in there where you can find the recording if you want to watch it again. There'll also be a link to a survey, which I'd appreciate you just taking 1 minute to answer. That just helps us pick the right subjects for the future so we know what you want to hear about. So thanks very much for your attention. Said I'll hang on for a little bit longer and check in if any other questions come in. And thank you very much and see you all soon. Take care.